are we going to do with the non-members? Someone guest is coming to your church. Should you serve Lord's table to that kind of people? What is biblical teaching on that, right? Now, I want you to listen very carefully, the logic, right? So I already said that Lord's table is for the members of the church. Members of the church, right? It is church, because that's where you cannot take disciplinary action through Lord's table for people who are not part of your church. So it is for the church. Now, the question of whether a host church may or must include Christian outside its own membership has been a narrow debate and often a vitriol in the history of Baptist life. Following details the three primary options to this question and defends one of the options, that is close communion. So we are going to talk about three communion, all right? Number one, open communion. And okay. Oh, no, I shouldn't be writing this here. Okay. This is very slow, this laptop. All right, there are three options. Number one, open communion. Number two, closed communion. Number three, closed communion. All right? Open communion, closed communion, and closed communion. So there is a simply a letter difference we are talking here. That is something like a closed. Does it come? Okay, closed and close, right? Closed communion and closed communion. So we are going to look at the difference today between these two ideas according to the Bible, right? So the central concern is this: though there are three principal positions on this issue, the determining factor is largely a binary question about the purpose of Lord's table. What is the purpose of Lord's table? That is the real question. Now, those who hold to an open communion, so this is open communion, argue that the rite is intended to celebrate, irrespective of all other differences, the common invisible union of believers with Christ. So those who say this, we believe in open communion, actually they are saying all what we do in Lord's table is to celebrate. That's the only thing we do in the communion. Though communion is regularly celebrated in local churches, it is emphatically not a local church ordinance. It is emphatically not a local church ordinance. So this is what many people are saying. So if it is not a local church ordinance, it is generally a Christian ordinance. Anyone can join, right? Instead, they say it is either Christian ordinance or ordinance at the church at large, the universal church ordinance, such as the decision of the church to withhold a communion from a person is tantamount to an announcement that this person is de facto an unbeliever. He's not a believer at all. That's what you are saying when you don't share Lord's table. So that is the first position. Means anyone who claims to be Christian, we give Lord's table. That is what those who hold to open position teach, right? They believe that this is not a local church ordinance. This is it's not a local church ordinance. This is a universal church or a Christian ordinance. So any Christian can participate, whoever may be, whatever may be your background, anyone can participate. Second, then there are other groups who believed closed or close communion, right? You see this one? Closed or close communion. They argue that the rite is intended to celebrate not only the invisible union of believers with Christ, but also with the visible union of believers in the local assembly. Yeah? This rite, that is communion, is intended to celebrate union with the local body of believers. As such, communion is strictly local church ordinance. Closed communion or closed communion, these two groups believe that this is church ordinance, like we already discussed in the beginning. And any celebration of the rite outside the auspicious of local church represents a de facto, a failure to properly regard the Lord's body, and such an instance of eating and drinking in an unworthy manner. It is equal to, if you do not consider this, that it is the union of the local body of believers, then this is eating and drinking in unworthy manner. So they believe that this is local church ordinance. Local church ordinance. So basically, this is primarily for the members. That is what, whether you are closed communion, you observe closed communion or close communion, whatever may be, both of them believe that this is for the primarily for the members. Now let's go a little bit deeper, right? Positions considered. All right, what should we say, or how should we analyze open communion? Communion is given to anyone. Open communion is offered without restriction to any professing believer, right? Anyone who claims to be a believer, yeah, he can participate. So yes, those who are Christians, those who believe in Jesus Christ, you may partake. That's what the pastor would say. No inquiry, no stipulation is made that he baptized a member of church, even possessing an orderly walk. Nothing is talked here. A strong theologian offers 4 reasons for rejecting this position. All right, why we should not have open communion. He says, open communion defies biblical practice, right? That is, those who received God's word, were baptized, were added to the church, and they celebrated Lord's. They broke the bread. So it is simply against the biblical principle if it is open communion. Open communion severely clouds the symbolism of local church unity communicated by the rite, right? Because this rite, this communion, actually communicates the unity of the local body. Open communion clearly violates that. Next one, open communion minimizes the value of baptism and church membership while attaching near sacramental value to the communion. All right, what does that do? Open communion minimize the value of baptism and church membership. Anyone can participate, so why should we be baptized? Why should we be part of a church? I can go anywhere. I can get bread and wine from anywhere, and I can celebrate Jesus' death. That's what important, nothing else. All right, so it minimizes the value of baptism. The next one is the last one, open communion eliminates the accountability of the church discipline, the sacrificing purity for the sake of unity. That means no accountability at all. Whoever come, you give. So where is the accountability? Where is the purity of the church? All these things are very, very important, right? Very important. So I say here that open communion is unbiblical. Unbiblical. You cannot give communion to anyone who comes to the church and say, you all are welcome. No, we don't. It's unbiblical because they don't understand the purpose of Lord's table. Now, let us consider the second view. What is the second view? Second view is a closed communion. Closed communion restricts communion to professing believers who are immersed and members in good standing of the host church alone. They do not give Lord's table to anybody else. You know, any pastor come to visit, Lord's table is not served to them. They do not give to anyone and everyone. Right? They don't give even to good Christians who are not the members of that particular local church. This practice is especially common among landmark Baptists, who are typically suspicious of the validity of any church save their own. In principle, this practice is valid since church cannot successfully evaluate the behavior of strangers or exercise discipline on them. It is the safest course of action not to eat with those outside the jurisdiction of the local church. All right? It is not safe to eat with those outside. So that is what closed communion says. So they give this to only the members of the church. Only the members of the church. All right? Now, the problem will be is that there are some biblical more practice. What we have seen is against this one. So that is the thing that we will look at. All right. Now, so this is what closed communion. Closed communion gives Lord's table only to the members. The next one is a closed communion. Right. Third one, closed communion. What is closed communion? Yes, it restricts communion to professing believers who are immersed and members in good standing of the serving church or any church of like faith and practice. Any church that has a like faith and practice of this church can also, anyone who has similar to that church can participate. This view recognizes that NT practice allows for churches to invite to the table those outside their membership. Right? So closed communion, what do? If a guest comes, they said, yes, you can participate in the table if you are born again, if you are immersed, if you are in a good local church, Bible preaching local church, if you have a good life, yes, you are welcome. So that means a church like us, we don't serve Lord's table to someone from traditional church like who has got an infant baptism. We don't, right? Cannot, because it is unbiblical. Infant baptism is unbiblical. Therefore, we don't serve. It is simply because it's not a good biblical church. He's not coming from a good biblical church. So the difference here is that closed communion welcome others also who have similar faith and practice of the hosted church. It is also concerned about abetting Lone Ranger Christians who seek to participate without recognizing Lord's body, right? And holding no membership at all in a church, or fleeing the discipline of another church. That means there are some people who run here and there. They don't want to be accountable. Or some people, they are under discipline, so they come out, sneak into other churches. We should not serve table to them. Close communion was demonstrably the practice of the early church and has been the majority practice in Baptist life in all about last century. So this is close communion is the communion that is practiced throughout in the Baptist churches, except landmarks, right? So Didache in the early church history, if you read Didache, there you have the same thing that being followed. So in keeping with this policy, churches that practice close communion typically extended communion as a courtesy to transient believers. All right. So here is a difference. Friends, if you are listening, what is the difference between closed communion and the close communion, right? In the closed communion, there is no D. That's the difference. No, it's much more. The main difference, closed communion, it is completely closed. The door is closed. Means Lord's table, communion is not served to anyone who are not part of that church. Period. Any pastor comes, any evangelist comes, communion will not be served. All right? That's what closed communion. But what is close communion? Now listen carefully. Those who practice close communion believe that communion is the right of the local church. That is the member's right. You see, you understand the difference here? The right. It is my right. Whose right? Member's right. It is not the right of visitors. Visitors have no right in participating in Lord's table. No right. Now what? But that is what we say. But we extend the fellowship, eating in our table. If you have same faith and practice, you're saved, baptized, members in a good standing local church of like faith and practice, you are welcome. But it is not your right. You don't have the right. Only the members have the right. But for the courtesy's sake, so that's what I say here, typically extend communion as a courtesy to transient believers who by letter or affirmation are established to be saved and baptized. So for the courtesy's sake, we extend communion. All right, so that is the way Lord's table, that's what close communion. Now, let me ask you, maybe this is the question that I asked before, is there any evidence in the Bible for a close communion? Can anyone talk about a close communion? Not closed, but close communion. Any evidence in the New Testament for a close communion? Anyone anybody who has got answer? Anyone? You can just say evidence for close communion. No, you don't find? I know everyone is muted, so I didn't hear anything. Do you have any idea about or any church where they practiced close communion? Hmm? No idea?
Can't think of.
Okay. All right, let's go to Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20. Let's read verse 7. Anyone? Can one of you read, please? Acts 20, verse 7. You can read, some of you here, please.
Yeah. Now, on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight.
All right. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps this is the verse that tells that on the first day of the week, they were gathered together to break the bread. All right? Question. All right. Okay, which church is this? Can anyone say the name of this church? Anyone? Scholars, please come and say. Anyone? Which church is this? If you've talked about Lord's table, might have read this passage, because many who advocate the idea that you need to have every Sunday Lord's table often quote this verse. Shall must know.
Corinthians.
It's not Corinthian church. Not Corinthian church. It is, if you read a verse above, you will get it. Look at verse 6. Verse 6. What do you read?
Troas,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Manoj.
shall I read?
Yeah.
6, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of the unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed 7 days.
Yeah. So where Paul stayed for 7 days?
Troas, yeah.
Troas. And then he's on the first day of the week, we gathered together to break the bread. So, which church, or where is this church located? Huh? Where is this church located?
Macedonia?
No, it is actually Troas. Yeah, it's that area. Troas is a place name. The church is located at Troas. So this is a church at Troas. All right? Church at Troas. Now the question is, Paul is, he said when we were gathered together to break the bread. So that means here is a church that they are gathered together to break the bread. So evidently we assume that Paul partook in the communion there, Lord's table there, right? Or Lord's Supper. Now the question is, Paul is from which church? What is the membership like? Paul is from which church?
He's from Antioch, yeah.
He is from the church at Antioch, right? He's sent from Antioch. But right here we see Paul coming to Troas, meeting brethren right there in Troas, breaking bread together with them, celebrating Lord's table. So the word break the bread is the key word used for the Lord's table throughout. And so he's not the member of the church at Troas. He's not the member, but he's partaking. So that is the evidence for a close communion. What is that? Yes, Lord's table is the ordinance of the local church, but same time, those who visit us also will have the opportunity to participate in Lord's table, not because visitors have the right to the table of that church, but for a courtesy's sake, we extended the fellowship because we believe their testimonies and we believe them. So that is what close communion actually is. All right. So that is, I think when you look at biblical patterns, it is not closed communion, but it is close communion that is practiced in the book of Acts.